Hello, and welcome to the first ever Hilltop Happy Hour. I'm Jeff Morneau, and I'm so excited to host this project that blends education and retirement planning, and yes, cocktail reviews. My goal for this series is really simple and straightforward. I want to provide free, quality education on retirement planning, something I'm personally very passionate about. And I just want to have a lot of fun doing it. To be honest, some of these retirement planning concepts can be a little dry at times. And so I really want this space to be light and quirky, to not take itself too seriously. But on the education side, my goal is to offer quality, consistent resources that you can use in preparing for your own retirement. So basically, this is how it's going to work. Each week, I'm going to pair a drink recipe with a retirement planning topic. And to my best ability, I guess really limited by my creative talents, I'm going to try and have the cocktail selection reflect or connect to the topic in some way. Like for today's happy hour, this being the very first one, I thought I would review a Paloma because that was a cocktail at my wedding, the signature cocktail, and I just want to signify new beginnings and celebrations. So let's look at the Paloma, okay, the delicious Paloma. So here we go. I think technically you're supposed to use grapefruit soda for the recipe. We just use squirt, which I guess could be considered grapefruit soda. But anyway, we use squirt. It works great. It's a refreshing drink, festive. I also highly recommend these clay mugs. We got ours from a flea market down the Rio Grande Valley. My wife's from there, so we visit quite frequently. But I think you can get them almost at any Mexican grocery store or market. You have to soak the mugs for at least like a half hour before you use them. But then you're good to go. We usually throw tahini on the rim, and then just throw some fajitas on the grill. Hey, and you'll be killing it this summer at your barbecue. I highly recommend it. And so cheers to Hilltop Happy Hour. Let's go. New beginnings. All right. And so we're back. Let's jump right into today's topic, which is longevity. So when I think about longevity and retirement planning, there's this movie that comes to mind. I don't know if you've heard it. It's called Big Fish. If you haven't seen it, there's this trope that runs through the film where the main character who is in hospice is being told he's dying. And his response to that is, get this, that he knows he's not dying because when he was a kid, a witch showed him exactly how and when he would die. And this ain't it. Now, the reason I think about this in terms of retirement planning is because this entire exercise would just be so much easier if a witch told us all when we were going to die. At that point, it would just be a math equation. Now, obviously, that's not how the human condition works. Each of us has a unique and unknown longevity. And because of this uncertainty, we have something known as longevity risk, or the risk of living longer than you expect, which can have serious consequences on your finances. When you're comparing longevity risk to other types of risk, I think it's unique in two ways. The first is that it in itself can bear fruit to other types of risk, mainly inflation risk, frailty risk, elder abuse risk, and the risk of accruing serious medical expenses. On the flip side, I also think it's unique in that it's a desirable risk to have. I mean, I think most would want to live a happy, long life. So while it shouldn't be feared, it should be accounted for in your retirement plan. But how do you account for it? Well, even though we can't foresee our own mortality, we can look to trends to help us prepare for it because ultimately, one of the simplest ways to help mitigate longevity risk is to pick a well informed life expectancy when crafting your plan. So, I want to take the next couple minutes and dive deep into, or not too deep, but I want to dive into where we stand today with longevity trends. My guess is that in the last couple years, you've probably heard two conflicting narratives surrounding longevity. The first probably goes something like this: oh my God, our country is so unhealthy that our life expectancy has actually declined for the first time in modern history. That's not good. The second narrative goes, man, retirement is just impossible to save for. People are living longer and longer. So that begs the question, which is it? Are people living longer or is life expectancy declining? Well, it turns out both are kind of true at the same time. Let's dive into the first narrative that life expectancy is declining. Excuse me. It is true that in the United States, life expectancy peaked in 2019, then dropped through 2022, brought on by, sadly, increased drug overdoses and the pandemic. However, some positive news is that life expectancy has since rebounded to currently being just shy of the 2019 peak. Should this trend continue, we could expect to see new highs in the coming years. So that's great. The second narrative is also true. People are living longer. According to a Pew Research article, the number of centenarians, I hope I got that right, centenarians, or people reaching 100, is expected to quadruple over the next 30 years. By 2054, it's projected that there will be 422,000 people living in this country in their triple digits. Just for reference, and get this, in 1990, there was only 37,000. And quick side note, this is why a lot of people are concerned about the price stability of long term care in the future. Hey, we can also look to Congress for evidence that people are living longer, and not just in the age of its members. That's a whole other story. But in the recent legislation, which increased the age at which you have to start your required minimum distributions from your tax deferred accounts. For reference, in 2019, the required beginning date was age 70 and a half. Today, it currently sits at 73, and in 2023, that age will be pushed out to 75. That's a huge difference to account for the changing life expectancy. But I have to ask, or you should ask, does looking just at life expectancy from birth have real merit in setting the goalpost for retirement planning? I would argue not really. After all, we're talking about life expectancy for retirees here. And for that reason, I wanted to take a minute and look at a graph that I think does have a ton of value when assessing longevity risk specifically in retirement. So this graph comes from an article called Long Can Retirees Expect to Live Once They Hit 65? It's written by Wade Fowle for the retirement researcher. Highly recommend his website. And by the way, all these resources will be linked at the end of the video. So this chart shows the probability of survival to different ages starting at age 65. I think viewing longevity through the lens of probability does have more value than just viewing it through the lens of life expectancy, because you can tell by the shape of the graph, longevity falls into a bell curve. And also, when we think about risk, it's not typically in terms of what the average thing is to happen, but what happens in that less likely but more severe case. So, to quickly review the chart, the red line represents the survival probability for women at 65, the blue line for men, and the yellow and green lines represent a hypothetical couple, both age 65, and the probability that one or both will survive to these age milestones that you see on the bottom axis there. To me, right away, a couple things stand out. The first is that if we look at a 40% likelihood of survival, we see men living past age 85 and women almost to 90. 40% chance of something happening when we're talking about financial risk is really high. Even more jarring, if we look at a couple, there's a 50% chance that one of them is going to live to 90. Well, sadly, just a 7% chance of both of them doing so. And that will be a whole other video on and happy hour on how do we prepare for the widower, unfortunately. I also want to know the shape of the graph, especially how it flattens out towards the end. This represents a tail risk in longevity when those who just keep on living, or as Matthew McConaughey would say, LIVIN. And we're back. All right. Also, there is one other demographic trend that I would be remiss without mentioning because it's just so stark, and that is the relationship between wealth and longevity. According to the Brookings Institution, for men born in 1950, there is a 14-year difference in life expectancy between the top 10% and the bottom 10% of earners. 14 years, it's crazy. I think most people intuitively get this relationship, although there is debate over whether longevity is correlated to wealth or the causation of wealth. There is one article that I found especially interesting, which looked at siblings and twins in relation to wealth and longevity over a 24-year period. It was a 24-year study. And you may have guessed it, even when comparing twins and siblings, similar genetics, similar upbringings, the study still found a sizable relationship between having more wealth and living longer. And so, what does all this mean? Well, here's my and also Hilltop Planning's takeaway. If you're watching this video because you're approaching retirement, or maybe you're already retired and you've accrued assets that are substantial enough to require a plan to manage them sustainably, to me, that tells me you're already probably in a demographic prone for longevity. Now, you throw in a partner who's in the same boat as you, And the chances of you having a lengthy timeline to plan for in retirement are very, very real. So, how do you prepare? I really don't want to dive too much into products in this video. I'll do that in later happy hours. But if you want to go the insurance route, which I'm not recommending, I'm just giving options here. I do want to highlight a QLAC, or a qualified longevity annuity contract. That's a pension like stream of income that you can buy and delay turning on until you're up to age 85. Kind of think of it like hitting the turbo button as you're running out of gas. You're currently allowed to carve up to 210K from your IRA to buy a QLAC that won't be counted towards your RMDs. So that's nice. You could also buy life insurance for the surviving spouse, or a joint life single premium mini annuity. Although without a true cost of living adjustment, which I don't think any of them have anymore, the ability for that stream of income to protect against longevity, it will wane over time. We're talking about decades here. And speaking of inflation protection, in my opinion, one of the easiest and most effective ways to help mitigate longevity risk is by delaying Social Security, especially for the surviving spouse who has a larger benefit. Because remember, that surviving spouse, delay it for the spouse who has a larger benefit, because the surviving spouse will be entitled to that larger benefit for the remainder of his or her life with inflation protections. It's always important to remember that as it stands now, Social Security is the best annuity you can buy for its cost of living adjustments and its embedded survivor benefits. So don't sleep on maximizing that benefit if you're concerned about longevity. Another low hanging fruit for addressing longevity risk is increasing the life expectancy assumptions you put into your retirement plan. You can kind of think about this input as a gauge for your risk tolerance to longevity risk. Now, to my knowledge, I believe most financial planning software sets 90 as the default life expectancy, plus or minus 5 years. While I believe this is a good starting point, if you're especially averse to risk, you may want to see what extending the life expectancy does to your overall plan. And that begs a question. If longevity runs in your family history, should you adjust for that in your life expectancy in your initial plan? Personally, I feel like if both your parents lived well into their 90s or something like that, and you find yourself in good health, there's no harm in seeing what a longer life expectancy does to your plan. I would, however, highly caution against the opposite. And by that, I mean, if both your parents died in their 60s and you're in good health, I would not lower your life expectancy just to increase your spending under the assumption you're going to die young. At that point, you're just playing chicken with your own mortality. And I don't think that's a good idea at all. Um, Now, if there is something critical about your health, or there's an issue that could affect your life expectancy, I would definitely relay that to your financial planner, as it could affect several decisions, including when to claim Social Security. A strategy that I really like involves a practice that I believe to be beneficial in all aspects of financial planning, and that's adaptability. So, what does that mean? Well, I think it's perfectly reasonable to start retirement planning with a life expectancy of 90, but to do so with an understanding that as you age and travel down that graph we looked at earlier, you reassess your health and your life and your plan. So let's say at 75, hey, you're still in good health, kick the life expectancy out to 95. At 80, hey, if you're still rolling, set it to 100. Now you may be thinking, well, if I do that, won't that reduce my spending? It could, but keep in mind that most spend less during what's known as the slow go years in retirement, where you're less active, travel less, and have kind of settled into a routine. And this way, you haven't reduced your spending for your early retirement, when you may be able to check off more of those bucket list items that you want to do. One last point, I know I'm rambling here, but just one last thing I should mention is that if this whole focus on choosing a really prudent life expectancy, it becomes less crucial if you find yourself overfunded for your retirement needs. So if you're constantly hitting that 100% Monte Carlo, then it is less of a concern. At that point, I would focus on your legacy goals. So that's it. That's my take on longevity and retirement. I know for some it can be uncomfortable to think about, but I hope maybe framing it as a risk as opposed to your own mortality can make it less personal, more approachable. Unless you do have that witch who can tell you when you're going to die. And if that's the case, that's pretty groovy. But I'd still let your financial planner know when that date is. Anyway, I hope you got a ton of value from today's happy hour. I had so much fun making it, and I really look forward to just keeping them coming. And until next time, I want you to remember one thing, and it's, hey, you are never, ever over the hill at Hilltop Planning. Cheers.